Yeah, I think a reality check.
Yep.
There's a lot of good signs in the trials. You know, you've still got to go and earn every win, every 2 points. And, you know, I think the Raiders just out-enthused the Broncos early. You know, I think it definitely brings them back to earth, that's for sure.
Well, hello everyone to this week's edition as we christen our brand new set here in Queensland. On debut, boys. How good does this look? Pulsating Maroons colours. Feels like you're about to run out for an Origin game.
Solid, very solid. Very Queenslander-like. Plenty of memories back there, Walt.
Yeah, certainly were, Lockie. All wonderful memories out there. And I've got to say, Adam, if there's something else, we've got the good colours here. There's no cockroaches laying around the floors. They're not welcome. But yeah, just to agree with Lockie, every time you see this place when you turn up, it excites you. You get there and you have the thrill of remembering what it was like and getting ready for the next games that are about to take place.
Well, we thought we'd do something to cheer our spirits up here in Queensland at the moment. It hasn't been a great season so far in the NRL. I think 7 games involving Queensland teams, only the 1 victory so far.
Which was the Broncos.
Which was the Broncos in round 1.
It was a pretty dismal weekend, But I sort of forgot that we only had 1 in round 1.
Yeah, with Titans having the bye, yeah.
So, look, it's not it's how you finish the race, it's not always how you start the race sometimes.
I reckon Gal has cursed us because in the pre-season, Gal's prediction was all 4 Queensland clubs would make the top 8. So maybe he's done the reverse curse on us.
That's the reverse psychology. Gal.
He's got into our heads. He's pumped up our tyres. But hopefully they can turn it around. Lockie, one of those losses, the Broncos to the Raiders on the weekend, how much was that maybe a bit of a wake-up call for the Brisbane squad?
Yeah, I think a reality check. There's a lot of good signs in the trials. You know, the win against the Chooks was very positive. A lot of talk about the club and the team, and what it reinforces to you that you still got to go and earn every win, every 2 points. And you know, I think the Raiders just out-enthused the Broncos early, got out to a good lead, and the Broncos just couldn't reel it in. So it was I think it definitely brings them back to earth, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lockie. It was all done early. All the Raiders' work, they certainly did that extremely well. 32-10 it was after just 60 minutes of play, and I think most of the people probably thought this is going to be too tough for the Broncos to come back from this. But, they can. Let's hope there is some great work done by it. But it was a pretty good display from the visitors. They don't have a wonderful record at the ground, and I think it's one of those games that we can expect to see better performances coming up from Brisbane. Was
it a case you think maybe, Lockie, they read their own press a bit too much? They belt the Roosters in round 1. Roosters a bit of a glamour club that's always in the finals. Is that a case? Or I guess how hard is it when as a Broncos player not to read all the hype?
Oh, I think it's always a risk, I mean, you got social media as well now. So, if there's people talking you up as individually or as a team, you're going to hear it in some capacity. So, look, I think it's if I was to use the analogy, it's a bit like what happened after 2023. Everyone just thought that it could just roll through 2024 and it could happen again, but you still got to go and earn every win. And I think from that perspective, that's a lesson learned that no matter where you play, you still need to go out there, roll the sleeves up and earn the win.
Do you think, that's the kind of loss that would infuriate Michael Maguire because he's a big attention to detail standards guy, leaks so many points in round 2? You think he'd be quite disappointed in that? Yeah,
and he spent a bit of time in the area as well.
Yeah.
And I really do think that he was expecting a much better performance, one that probably his association with Canberra would bring on. We can't get too carried away too soon, but the disappointing start certainly is something that I think will make him a little bit crankier at the training sessions, and he'll level the expectations to the players, and they won't have any secrets in front of them what the coach wants, and if the positions are available, should they not be chalking up successes.
I think the other part to this is that the perceptions of individuals and perceptions of teams will change weekly in the early parts of the season. While teams are trying to find their rhythm, find their groove, there'll be games where teams have underperformed, there'll be teams that have surprised. And that'll happen for the next probably 6 weeks before the competition really settles down.
Yeah, it was really hard tipping around. So many upsets this week. Lockie, Reece Walsh copped a fair bit of criticism in the wake of this game. I think he actually had negative fantasy or super coach points, which is kind of hard to do. 4 errors, 4 missed tackles for a fullback. Was that criticism warranted, or is a slow start to the season more?
Well, again, I think if you look at his performance round 1 to round 2, it was chalk and cheese.
Yep.
So I think, Reece is the type of player that we expect, a lot of good things from. And when he has a poor night, then people, tend to want to, give that criticism. And is it warranted? Look, his performance wasn't great, but I would say collectively as a team, the Broncos were off their game.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lockie. He didn't get a hell of a lot of assistance from those teammates, and it is early in the season. We've still got to recall that, but I think he was probably feeling the pressure as much as any other player on the day. On the night, that certainly wasn't one of their best, and not an ideal way to start off.
One of the things you got to, and you would have gone through this yourself when you played, but the better players of an opposition team, the opposition coach, they'll target you. They'll try and put you off your game because you're so influential to the result if you're given time and space. And so that's something that Reece and a lot of other players in the Broncos, we're going to need to, I guess, get used to, because the opposition coaches will target you.
How'd they used to put you off your game? Well, a few elbows?
Oh no, it was actually, how was it done? It was done by some pretty good footwork from Brett Kenny that left me just trying to tackle thin air. I missed him a couple of times, and he had the head wobble going, and he realised that he'd probably, there was a fair bit of pressure on the Lewis versus Kenny, who's going to get the test spot, and it continued on, and I had an absolute shocker. And Brett used to always have some humour about him, thanking me for my wonderful display to help his chances. So that was something. But I always used to find that in areas like that, or fields like that, when you're playing away from home, that is the best way to be inspired yourself. You know that you've got to put up or shut up, and if you don't, you're left with a fair bit of egg all over the face.
Well, for a fullback, I think the thing that opposition coaches will target, they'll put the bomb up. And they'll tell their players to rough him up, so get in your face, don't give him anything, and when he's down on the ground, make him feel like he's tackled. So that's, I cop that as a fullback. And then, when you're a 5'8", the other thing that they used to do was fifth and last. They'd be India, rush you on fifth and last kick, and just, these days you can't do it, but they just put you on the ground and make sure they knew you were coming.
Lockie, did you find it happened more so early in the game rather than the later stages, trying to get off to a bad start for the side?
Yeah, there'd be pressures that they'd have a direct or a plan or a game tactic where they try and put you off. But the good teams obviously hold that for 80 minutes. But that's what the Raiders did the other night. They were a sustained 80-minute performance.
And I think what that game highlighted to me is how dumb the Titans were letting Jamal Fogarty go. His kicking game is just so on point and accurate, and he sets up a lot of those kicks to put Reece Walsh under pressure. And something like, I was looking at the winning percentage is almost double when he plays for the Raiders as opposed to when he's out of the team, and highlights the key of having that just organising half.
Yeah, and Ricky Stewart was one of the best halfbacks the game's seen, so I'm sure his coaching has a bit of an impact on Jamal.
And what about, it's way too early to be picking origin sides, but Billy Slater, how's he assessed Reece Walsh versus Kalen Ponga the opening 2 rounds? Knights undefeated at the moment, and Reece Walsh, as you said, bit of a roller coaster.
Oh, mate, it's really early. It's way too early. I'm sure Billy's watching, but, Kalen was outstanding on Thursday night. Reece didn't have his best game, but he'll bounce back.
Yeah, Kalen was very good.
Yeah,
love watching him. Just so cool, calm, and collected, and that's the way that you want to start a season off. I mean, it's not the same for both of them, and we're probably being a little bit unfair in making the judgment. But certainly there's plenty of rounds to go until these guys have got to put their form on the board for the representative selectors.
Yeah, that try assist in particular he had for Dane Gagai that left Joey in all when he kind of moved his hips wide, grabbed the ball, and then passed it out to Gagai. That was amazing against the Dolphins.
Yeah, they both can do some special things, and I'm sure Billy watches them closely every week.
One team not doing anything special at the moment, my Cowboys. 0-2, absolutely obliterated in both rounds by Manly, and then they copped it at home in Townsville against the Sharks. What's going on there, Lockie?
Defence. Yeah, I think like they were in the game for a long period of time against the Sharks, but once the Sharks got the ascendancy, they leaked quite a few points. So, we talked about the change in the back line with the personnel. There's a few changes with Nanai not being there this week. So I think the combinations in defence are a real sort of, they're having an impact at the moment where the players aren't trusting each other and they're leaking too many points. Yeah,
poor individual efforts, poor team effort, I thought was on display, and it really was quite shocking. I thought I was probably expecting something far better than that, and it's easy to be very critical earlier in the season, but certainly when they're playing on a fairly familiar ground as well, it really is something that leaves you a little bit gobsmacked.
Yeah, I tipped them to win. I thought they would have had the bounce-back factor there. They've mixed up the halves in the off-season, Lockie. 2 games in for Tom Duffy. Do you keep sticking with him, knowing you've got an experienced half there in Jake Clifford?
Well, I think we just talked about defence is probably the issue, and I mean, and this is not anything against Jake Clifford, but does he fix the defensive issue? I don't think it's a team thing. Yeah. I'd probably give Duffy a little bit longer, persist with him just to give him a bit more time in the saddle, because at the end of the day, if they're not leaking too many points, and it's taking pressure off their attack.
Yeah, you're right, Lockie, and we're probably being a little bit unfair, but you're not going to take Rome in a day. He's got to feel quite comfortable to the early part of the season, and that's easier said than done. And they come up against some sides that have been pretty tough on them as well.
Yeah, and we get to the curious case of Jason Taumalolo now. He's on the comeback trail from a foot injury. He played in the Queensland Cup on the weekend for the Mackay Cutters against the Townsville Blackhawks up there. I think he had 56 minutes for memory, 10 runs and 108 running metres there. But $1 million a season now, is that starting to bite the Cowboys well?
Well, I think I know why you've asked the question, Adam. You got sick and tired of listening to me whinge about Taumalolo not being in a side and talking about what a wonderful performer he can be. Admittedly, injuries can keep him not at his best, but to see him not in the side can only be explained through the injuries that he may be carrying and not in prime form at the moment. He's got to find his best form, but I'm one of the presidents of the fan club for Jason Taumalolo. What a wonderful performer he is. Now it's time for him to take that experience on board and lead the way for the Cowboys.
Yeah, it just highlights the risk with a 10-year deal. Jason Taumalolo, there's no doubting his ability and what he's done in the game and what he can still produce. But if the body starts to fail, and I think that's probably been the last couple of years has just been whether it's a knee or a foot issue, and at the moment he can't get into the first grade team, which means you're not getting value for money. But that's I think Jason's got the ability to fight his way back. We know how good he can be. But his fitness obviously needs to get to that point for Todd to consider him.
Yeah, I think at the start of the deal, it was good value. And middle of the deal, it was all right value. Now it's looking as though it's not good value just because, as you said, it's so difficult to pay a middle forward a 10-year deal. Like, in comparison, DC had a 10-year deal at Manly. That's turned out to be really, really good value. Because of the physical toll it's taken, isn't as much. Do you think moving forward, you're not going to offer a 10-year deal to a middle forward?
I think the rarest players going out there are game-managing halfbacks.
Yeah.
So if you find one of them,
sign them up to 10.
Sign them up to 10. But outside of that, it's not worth the risk. And again, this is nothing, no criticism to Jason.
Yeah.
He good on him. He got a great deal for him and his family. But it just highlights the fact that a middle forward at some point is going to find fault with their body.
Who was playing front row for a considerable period at different stages last year. I guess the coach picks out where he wants him, and he's quite entitled to. But he is a player that's worth much more than he's displaying at the moment.
Well, he's a likeable person, and we all want him to be back there shooting the lights out. So hopefully he can get back to that.
Yeah. And even if you just put him on the bench, is there a factor that he will have like an aura? of like, you're a young Cowboys player, even if Taumalolo's on the bench and gets 20, 25 minutes, you're looking next to him and you're thinking, oh, it's Jason Taumalolo, that's going to make me play better?
Yeah, but, obviously his fitness is not where it needs to be yet.
Yeah.
He'll get there, but at the moment it's not there. Look, the teams come out later today.
Yeah.
He might be a late inclusion.
That's the problem we always have with the show. We film it 2 hours before the teams are announced.
Yeah.
So, yeah, hopefully we see Jason Taumalolo at Suncorp Stadium for that Cowboys-Broncos blockbuster. The last one I want to mention on the Cowboys, Jeremiah Nanai. How do they go about putting him back in the team, Lockie? Or is it just he's just got to get his defence right?
Well, I think it's not about how they get him back into the team, it's how Nanai gets himself back into the team, right? Because I think Todd's obviously looking for a high work rate, good attitude, and some of the players that he's left behind just might not be at that standard yet. So, sending Jeremiah back is it's a ploy to see what his reaction's like. So, I didn't see the game he played on the weekend for the Pride, but depending on how he played and his attitude, again, he might be a chance to play against the Broncos this week. Yeah,
you hit the nail on the head, Lockie. He gets himself back into the side, displays the form, the ability that he's had over the past few seasons since making his way into first grade, and it's up to him now to just display that form.
And speaking of Queensland Cup, a few people asked me during the week, you can still watch Queensland Cup Sunday afternoon on the 9 Now app. So download that 9 Now app. The match of the round, Sunday afternoons, 2 o'clock. I think this week it's Burleigh Bears against Tweed. Burleigh Bears is a Broncos feeder club. So if you're a Broncos fan out there, you'll see some Broncos affiliated players line up there. Moving on now to our Tab Big Call. Thanks to our friends at the Tab. It's time for the Big Call. Boys, what are your big calls for this week? What I'm going to say is Todd Payten's under a lot of pressure as a coach, but I'm going to make the big call this season. No coach will be sacked during the season. I know there's one or two that always happen, but looking through the list where clubs are at, even the struggling clubs, say like the Eels haven't made a good start to the season, but Jason Ryles, obviously in his first season, Shane Flanagan at the Dragons, he did improve them last year. So my big call is, for the first time in a long time, no coach will be sacked mid-season.
I think on average there's 3 a year.
Yeah, I know.
So that's a big call.
Yeah. I was looking through the list. Yeah, I was trying to do my homework here. Here we go.
Yeah, but certainly the coaches are all feeling enormous pressure as the season progresses, and understandably it's up to the players to display their form out in the field and make sure that they produce their best. But to be a coach in that position, having been there, done that, know exactly how they do feel.
Have you got your big call on your list there, Wal?
Oh, my big call is David Fifita gets on in the first half this week.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the Titans have a good win.
Yeah, against the Knights at the Seabus, yep.
So I'm just thinking 1 week at a time here, because your big call's over the whole year.
It's a way too big call, yeah.
Yeah, it's a real big call.
Yeah.
And I agree with the Titans, Lockie. It's a big call again to be able to do it. But is it the forwards that are going to be leading the way for the Titans? Well, if they don't, they're in a little bit of strife. A lot of their strength certainly is up front. They lead the way from the big boys, and they certainly do so. Whenever they're at their best, they're almost impossible to stop.
Well, there's been a bit of talk about David not getting on in the first half last week, so I just reckon there might be a response from David and the Titans this week against Newcastle, who are flying.
Yeah. Lead the way right from kick-off.
I'll quickly go through the team. So Storm, Craig Bellamy isn't getting sacked by the Storm. Ricky Stewart's Raiders off to a good start. Cameron Ciraldo's turned the Bulldogs around. Adam O'Brien's got the Knights off to a good start, so that's highly unlikely. Rabbitohs aren't getting rid of Wayne Bennett. Broncos aren't getting rid of Michael Maguire. Benji at the West Tigers, maybe if it falls apart. The Sharks, Craig Fitzgibbon's done an excellent job at Cronulla. Seabold at Manly, highly unlikely. Panthers, Cleary, absolutely no chance. The Warriors was Andrew Webster. He improved them. They went down a bit last year, as Dobbo's calling me on the phone now. Delete that. Roosters, Trent Robinson, not happening. Titans, Des Hasler, highly unlikely because the Titans don't have the money to pay him out. Wolf in his first year at the Dolphins, not going to happen. Cowboys, Todd Payten under pressure at this stage, and the Eels was Jason Ryles' first year. So,
All right, can we revisit this about round 10? See if you've got the same tone.
Yes.
Can change
I'm a
very
bit too
quickly.
confident there. Okay.
It takes one win for each coach to impress their support staff.
You win some, you lose more. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
Well, it all kicks off here, Queensland, Friday night, the big Queensland Derby, the Broncos up against the Cowboys. First time Ben Hunt will play for the Broncos against the Cowboys since that 2015 grand final. So this year is the 10-year anniversary of probably the greatest grand final ever played. Do you think, in a way, Wallen Lockie, that drop ball comes into his head at any stage in the lead up to this game?
Completely different situation.
Yep.
This is not a grand final. Look, he might stand in the position to catch the ball, and if he does, then maybe he'll get a cheer from the Broncos fans because everyone knows and talks about it. I feel sorry for him, by the way, because we moved on. It's 10 years ago. Like, he's not thinking about that. Like, this is a totally different situation. I reckon most of the Broncos' heads right now are going, well, how do we react from last weekend's performance?
He's probably expecting to hear that call come, but 99.999% he's certain to catch it and make the most of it from there. It's certainly not going to spoil a player of his experience.
If you're the Cowboys, do you do a bit of homework and look at it and go, maybe let's kick to him on purpose?
Well, Kyle Felt, your man Kyle Felt.
He was the one who did the kick.
Well, he used to have these torpedo kickoffs, and they were hard to take. Trust me. And so he's gone now. So I don't know who's doing them, but no, I don't think you target him. Look, we've moved on, and I think, we're talking about it now, but I think if Ben was in a grand final against the Cowboys again, maybe time. But
and if it was in a match of much more greater experience, there'd probably be a fair bit of pressure on it, but certainly not at a club level with 2 points on the board.
What have you made of Hunt's start to the season so far and how he complements Adam Reynolds?
It's been measured. I think they've got a good understanding of each other's game. He threw, even though they got beat the other night, he threw a couple of great passes to Jesse Arthurs, scored a try. So I think Adam's not trying to overplay his hand, and neither is Ben. And so I think it's working. At the end of the day, they just didn't have the same intensity as the Raiders last week. Yeah,
I agree, Lockie, and I think they look pretty good together. And when they get the opportunity to be able to work alongside and get some increased support play, they're going to look even better. And
what about this derby? Is it still the biggest game in Queensland? Look, the Dolphins-Broncos game has rocketed into contention to match it. I think we need a good Cowboys-Broncos derby this week for it to maintain the mantle because Dolphins are knocking on the door.
I wrote about this on the weekend. The personnel's changed, right?
Yeah.
We've got 2 New South Wales coaches.
Yep.
Completely different players from 10 years ago. So the rivalry has, I guess, dropped off a little bit, but we're only one good game away from that being revived, and that could be this Friday night.
You think of how many great games during that period, Golden Point, the grand final. They played another semi-final up there in Townsville a few years after that.
They were some of the most spectacular games that I can recall over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Wonderful performances, and it was just worthwhile making a special effort to get there and watch them, to be live at the ground when they ran out. They were wonderful games, and I think they did enormous levels for rugby league to benefit it further.
Well, they were ridiculous. The margins over a 10-year period were incredibly low. And so it was great. And the Cowboys come to Brisbane desperate for a win. Broncos need to bounce back, but I reckon we're in for a very good, close game.
Well, with that in mind, who has more at stake? The Cowboys obviously winless for the year, but if the Broncos back up that loss to the Raiders with another defeat against the Cowboys, who are previously winless, who's got more on the line?
I reckon whoever loses got a lot of pressure on them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying coaches, but I'm just saying
for the season. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if the Cowboys go 0-3, that's a terrible start. But if the Broncos lose a game that they're probably favoured to win, 2 in a row, then all of a sudden things they start getting talked about a lot in the wrong way.
Yeah, losses at home aren't all that enjoyable. But I've got to say, I think the Cowboys There's pressure on both. I agree with Lockie there, but they're in a little bit of strife at the moment, the Cowboys, and they really need to get a roll on.
If you are a Cowboys fan and want a glimmer of hope, in 2015 they lost their first 3 games of the season, then went on to win the premiership. Also, they had a bloke called Jonathan Thurston in the team back then, which
and Cole Felt was Cole Felt.
Yeah. Super duper Gavin Cooper, Matt Scott, what a team back in the day. But after this derby, the Broncos have another derby against the Dolphins the following week at Suncorp Stadium. That'll be huge. But it's been a tough start to the season. You know, Lockie, what are you made about the Dolphins? It's kind of hard to get a proper gauge on them so far.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously have been very disrupted the first couple of weeks with the cyclone and having to logistically move things around. But I just felt like their lack of attention to detail and defence. That's probably the one thing that when you look at Wayne Bennett and what he does really well is he'll have this individually and collectively as a team. He'll have these defensive systems that everyone has to do their job in. And so when he leaves an organisation, it's very hard to get that exact level that he has or detail that he has. And so I think with the Dolphins, that's what I'm noticing. Like I thought Kalen Ponga, they couldn't handle him the other night, right?
Yeah.
Defensively, they were making poor decisions around him. So it's probably the one thing that I've noticed, and it was probably semi-expected given when Wayne leaves an organisation that's the defensive system just probably loses a touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct, Lockie. The hard work that they've been getting from their forwards, I think it's been pretty good. There have been 1 or 2 errors that they've been coming up with which haven't impressed the coach too much, but I really do think that the backs have struggled. I don't know whether they've changed their defensive strategies or made a quick alteration to who was going to be playing where, but it hasn't been all that impressive, and they don't get a start on shortly. It's going to be a long, hard season coming up from them.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that they probably, when you look at their team on paper, there is some try scorers there and some point scorers, but at the moment they're a bit like the Cowboys. They're just leaking too many points.
Yeah.
Yep.
You mentioned that attention to detail. 3 penalties for the roll ball and the play the ball and not playing the ball properly. They're unforgivable when you're in good ball positions.
Yeah, and I used to say, you know, whenever you watch teams like that, I used to admire the Bennett coach teams because he used to do a lot of the simple skills and drills at every training session. And I can remember being at the first training session and we were practicing playing the ball, and Wayne saw me. He said, is there something wrong with this? And I said, Wayne, we used to do this when we were in under 8 practice playing the ball. And he said, well, after watching your last game, you're not doing it any better.
Yeah.
And it was all about the simple skills of the game that need to be perfected. And that's the difference between success and failure.
We would do warm-ups for 10 minutes and all we'd do is practice playing the ball properly.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So it's players create habits and habits come from practice, blah, blah, blah. But when you're under fatigue, those habits need to kick in. And so a lot of times when these penalties are given away for not trying to play the ball properly, it's because they're fatigued and they just couldn't. But muscle memory is a big part of, that attention to detail.
Yeah, and the other one that I've noticed that is the dummy halves that are coming in and trying to scoop the ball up and take off. I mean, if they perfect it and they get away, they'll make a break and hear the cash register ringing with points on the board. Well, certainly worth it. But if it doesn't, well, you can expect a spray from the coach.
Yeah, Harry Grant seems to be the king of that. Watching the Dolphins training this week, it looks as though Jack Bostock is coming back. So he had that MCL knee injury. So he was the Rookie of the Year last year. That'll be a good addition. And also at training, they've been switching up Herbie and Jake Varillo, so various sides. Defensively, that's probably a reason they're doing that too, Lockie. But
so hopefully the Tigers aren't listening.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. But they do return to their spiritual home this week at their stadium at Redcliffe. How important is that to get that win over the Tigers, just to get the monkey off the back?
Yeah, I think because after a couple of defeats, albeit they've been away from home, they've been tough games, the pressure builds. And while it's not huge, but it's just in the back of your mind. So, the Tigers they're playing well. Right?
Yeah.
So they're playing a good team, but we're playing at home. It is a winnable game. And if you miss, then, it's just you start asking a lot of questions. So from that perspective, like getting a good performance this week at home is really important to him.
Yeah, and one of them, I think Hamiso is certainly going to be looking forward to it. He's had one or two, and he's a wonderful player. I'm expecting him to be the player of the match quite comfortably from this point forward. He's just had one or two errors in the game, and a person of his excellence certainly doesn't make too many of those.
A couple of times you've seen Hammer get the ball and think pass straight away, which doesn't really seem as natural. Like, what's it like as a fullback, Lockie, when you're a natural runner and you want to run, but you've got to balance that passing aspect as well? That seems to be quite difficult for someone like him.
Yeah, well, I was never as fast as Hammer.
Yeah.
But, look, I think because he's been in that position for a while now, he's obviously trying to expand his game.
Yeah.
So he's probably doing a lot more passing at training. But his greatest strength has been able to accelerate into space. So I think his first mindset should be, let's run and try and draw defenders into me, and then I can create an overlap by doing that, rather than think pass first. So run into the gap, draw the defenders in, and then pass.
Yeah.
If you've got the skills and the brilliance, it often comes by as just a simple request. I remember watching Lockie in the early days when you were at fullback and managing to position yourself absolutely perfectly, and that doesn't come for people that don't have the wonderful knowledge of the game. Hamiso, I think we've all thrilled watching him play, but usually it's when he's had a couple of tough trots, we can expect the best from him coming up in the matches that follow.
Yeah, hopefully we get a fast, dry track out there at Redcliffe Saturday afternoon. See Hamiso at his best, running hopefully a couple of 80-metre tries to do the Dolphins well. But Lockie, if they don't win, Wolfie starts his coaching career as an NRL head coach 0-3. You know, what do the leadership positions at the Dolphins do to keep up his confidence if that's the case?
Oh, look, I think 0-3 is not the end of the world. You know, it's not like they've been blown off the park the first two games. They've been in the contest. Probably Newcastle were a bit more dominant than South were against them. But look, I don't think there's any time. It's not time to panic or stress there. I think the senior players on the ground just need to, I guess, reinforce what the coach is saying and just everyone buy into what they want collectively, and that'll give them the best chance of winning.
And just on the Titans, we've touched on a bit of the David Fafita stuff, the surprise of having him on the bench. But how frustrating would it be? So they had the bye in round one, and then surprisingly they played the last game in round two, but then they were down, I think it was 22-0. How disappointing is that you've waited that long to see something from the team, come out and do it, and they just don't fire a shot in the first half?
Well, again, we talked about it last week, but that's a very hostile suburban ground, that one.
Yeah.
And the Bulldogs playing at Belmore, we're always going to be, a bit like Canberra and Canberra, we're always going to be on and up for it.
Yeah.
And the Titans probably underestimated that to a certain degree. But I would say that the Titans' discipline was what killed them early. They just gave away too many. They dropped too many balls and gave away too many penalties and gave the Bulldogs all the field position.
Yeah.
So they need to fix that first. They need to get their discipline right, the Titans.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lockie. A poor start from them, but they've got to make sure that they are quite prepared to put in an extra effort to. But again, playing the Bulldogs on their track, that is something different. That is something that I think always takes quite a long time to get used to.
Well, the good teams defend their mistakes or defend their penalties, and that's probably the Titans aren't doing that at the moment.
Yeah, it continues to be a problem. Has Desi lost his Midas touch in terms of defensive structures? Because that used to be his real strength as a coach.
Well, if you look at the back end of last year, they leaked a lot of points.
Yeah.
And, 40 points against a good team, though. But still, that's way too many. So they've got to... We're talking about the Cowboys, we're talking about the Dolphins defensively, and obviously the Broncos were poor in that space. And the good teams are defensively good every week. So if you want to be, playing finals football, you need to get your D in order.
I'd be interested to spend some time listening to Desi in what his request is to the players and what he's quite prepared to do. Is he changing the defensive pattern already? And I'd be extremely surprised if that was moving too far too soon. I think Des's experience certainly will guarantee that he inspires the players a little bit, makes them feel a little bit more confident. He's managed to do that quite often previously, and I think that he'll do it again.
Well, his dojo was underwater for quite a while on the Gold Coast with all the flooding there. So hopefully it's dried out and they can do a bit more wrestling practice there, the Titans. But one real positive, Tino's successful comeback from that ACL injury. We need him not only for the Titans but Queensland for Origin this year. It was great to see him back.
Yeah, good to see him back. He'll be better for the run, as will a few others. We talked about Dave Fafita, and I think he had a bit of a checkered pre-season.
I think he had an ankle problem, yeah.
So the bigger guys obviously need game time to get their match fitness, and hopefully those two in particular get a fair bit of game time over the next few weeks and build their fitness up.
Yeah, and interesting, you mentioned Felty before. I was supposed to do my homework with my top 3 players now that Felty and Oatsy have retired. I forgot to do it last week, so that'll be my homework again. I'll have to have a big asterisk next to the name.
But the top 3 of the current competition?
It has to be, 3 Queensland players.
3 Queensland
because
players.
you were up me last week, remember when I said Pappenhausen? You said it has to be a Queensland.
Yeah, you can pick your 3. So this is your new 3 favourite or new 3 top 3?
Yeah, 3 favourite players
right.
who I guess have to be eligible to play Origin for Queensland potentially. So I'm doing that in the next week. As we build up to the big Queensland derby here live and free on 9 Wide World Sports. Friday night, the Broncos or the Cowboys, who will get their season back on track. You can catch it all on Wide World of Sports.